Good afternoon, everyone. This video is brought to you by foodforliberty.com/adapt2030. I always talk about the seeds that are available, the heirloom seeds from Food for Liberty. And the message I'm really trying to get across is regardless if you use these heirloom seeds, you're going to have to learn how to plant food. You are absolutely going to need to know this as a basic skill moving forward into the grand solar minimum. We're going to have to supplement the food supply chain kind of like our grandparents did. We're going to have to learn how to grow our own gardens again and have communities and neighbors helping each other. That's the way it was. It's the way it has to be moving forward. So click the link below to learn more about the heirloom seed kit that they offer, and then also start your own research using what they've compiled as the best nutrient and protein source in plants so you have a healthy diet. But whatever you do, please research heirloom seeds for the grow zone you're in and the climate band that you're in. New research report out absolutely questioning the validity of NOAA, NASA, HadCRU. The scientists and academia involved in this report slamming that the data sets are not valid representation of reality. Compared with the Met Office in the UK, these temperatures are absolutely skewed warmer. And what they did was, in the research, they kept finding they would lower the temperature to try to make it then appear there was a steady warming upward trend since the beginning of the 1900s. They were caught red-handed faking the data. And then Greenland record cold in July, 33 degrees below Celsius, all-time record set July this year, 2017. And now there's snow in the middle of July in Quebec, Canada. Greenland's gaining ice. You see that blue line? That's all-time record. But the valid version 6, UAH global temperature updates, 2016 compared to 2017 also showed dropping cooling temperatures on a planet. Why is the planet showing signs of cooling, manipulating the data to try to pretend and show it's warming, but all the signs are in front of us and nobody's talking about it? And please remember to subscribe to Adapt 2030 while you're watching the video. Absolutely. People are waking up and calling out the fraud of NOAA, NASA, and HadCRU on the surface temperature data manipulation that's been going on. Another add to the list of the group of scientists that don't agree with 100% CO2 warming. They are actually calling into question the temperature results that we've been using to base all these claims of global warming and increasing temperatures. They found that 3 of the data sets are not valid in a representation of reality. And the article also calls for the indictment and prosecution of every person and organization involved in this climate fraud. Now, the flawed NOAA data compared to the Met Office data, completely different. And the report finds that they had to remove old data, and they say it was nearly always accomplished by removing previously existing data and inserting new data, and thereby erase the middle of the century cooling and then middle 1900s, 1940, 1950. So it looked like it was just straight up and there was no flattening and no natural cooling on the planet. It was just straight up and up for CO2. And NOAA, NASA, and HadCRU have been called out on this. This is from the GISS. Temperature set original extrapolated out to what's this 2010. They show that late 1930s entering into the Dust Bowl. And it also shows on the very left side of the chart, way back in the 1880s, it was even warmer than today. And the 1930s Dust Bowl. And then there was the cooling from, say, 1945 to 1965. That actually shows up on the records here, but as an example, we'll take a look at the different lines of information input. 1980 is the top blue line, and 2015 is the very lowest black line. So what they've been doing is lowering the temperatures each year to make it appear as if it were an uptrend in the temperatures, just straight up, steady up, never a decline, never natural cooling. It was just straight up because of CO2. And this is where they got caught trying to fudge this data and massage it in to make it appear. And HadCRU as well, 2001 compared to 2010. You can see how the earlier readings are pushed down to make them appear a little bit cooler, to make that trend line appear that it's going in a linear fashion upward, year upon year, warmer upon warmer. Then we go back to, I love microfilm. But back in 1999, they hadn't gotten around to manipulating the data, or at least implementing it full steam where it actually would show on the temperature record as a discrepancy, as you've just seen. It actually shows a downtrend from, say, 1930, but somehow this just disappears. In New Zealand, the same way. NOAA. We look at Cornell at University, days above 32 Celsius, which is 90 degrees Fahrenheit. If we were truly getting warmer and warmer, this chart should not be bottoming at 2016. And as you see that spike temperature right around 1928, look at the number of days over 90 degrees all the way until 1956. And then suddenly when we get into our era, where it's supposedly the warmest ever, you can see that it's not. And see, this is the type of information that made me start this channel. I come across things all the time that are like this, so I start to ask the questions. And then we see in Detroit, this is the northern United States, so I thought it was supposed to be warming the whole entire northern part of United States, Canada warming into oblivion, Arctic melting everywhere. But at least the number of summer daily heat records is down in those two places. Well, speaking of temperature records, let's talk about Greenland. July, coldest temperature ever recorded in the Northern Hemisphere in July. This year on Greenland, minus 33 degrees Celsius. Bet you didn't hear about that in the news, did you? Yeah, it was on Summit Station, 33 degrees Celsius below zero. The coldest temperature ever in the Northern Hemisphere in July. And look at that blue line. That's even going above the 2% standard deviation. This is the most record ice balance increase that they've had since at least the 1980s. You know, and there was a lot of records of sailors going up there. Why did they call it Greenland before? There used to be pastures there where they could graze herds. That's not happening anymore, and the ice is increasing. And I was told it's going to be melting. So can somebody explain that to me? And whatever way you look at it, 2017 is anomalous. And then there's more signs around. The UAH global temperature put only a mere 0.21 C over baseline. And what's telling about this, you have to go to the numerical form to even let it sink in a bit deeper. When you start looking at which parts of the planets are cooling, they're also showing a downtrend in temperature slightly each year, not increasing. So these last 3 years where it said, oh, it's the warmest year ever by 1/100th of a degree, and then we see in 2017 in the boxes there, those are like 2/10ths of a degree down. So the previous year it was what? 0.03 degrees all-time world record. It's like 4/100ths of a degree so far combined. Any of these drops is going to erase that. So I don't know how they can be so precise down to 100th of a degree anyway when measuring a global temperature. There's very few stations even down in Antarctica. What, less than 100 to cover the entire continent? How much of Eurasia is uncovered? I mean, there's an enormous amount of this planet that's not covered by temperature sensors. And even with satellites, that's the whole thing about them griping about, well, the satellites aren't precise, yet they're trying to use satellite data to show how precise they are. So again, it's all this mind game of, oh, just believe us, we're the experts. But what doesn't make any sense is along with the Greenland record temperature, now it's snowing in Canada, in Quebec, which is west of Greenland. Look in on the province of Quebec here, wide out so you can see exactly where it is in Canada. If you head due east, past the Maritimes, the next large landmass you come into is Greenland. So it snowed enough that snow is visible on the mountains. So it went from no snow to being visible on the mountains. This is a screen capture off the CBS Montreal. I linked everything below. At one of the work sites, it was well lit there so you could see how much snow was coming down. Unbelievable. And how windy it was. It wasn't about the snow. That wind was howling at like 50 miles an hour or something. 70 kilometers an hour, just howling wind with that snow. And even the local weather forecasts say it's not normal to see this kind of weather in the month of July. And you know, we're trying to look for unusual signs of wind vortices and things in our atmosphere changing based on the increase of galactic cosmic rays and the amount of cloud cover that's forming. And all this volcanic ash in the air now. 30 plus volcanoes all spewing ash and particulate at least 15,000 feet. A lot higher than that, up 30,000 feet, 60,000 feet. So you just start to look for the signs of increased wind and snows that just are not usual, and how these things are mixing with the precipitation and the new cloud layers between 15 and 18,500 feet. Well, here's another example. Santiago. Okay, they rarely get snow anyway, but the ferocity of this storm was just something unheard of. Was the wind and the heaviness of the snow. And over 350,000 homes were without power due to so much wind damage ripping down electrical lines across huge swaths of the country. It wasn't just Santiago. Yeah, that was interesting in itself because of the record. But looking on the map here, Ryan Maui, top right is where that storm front approached over. Closer in here. It's going to be reaching over into Brazil. Record cold in Brazil along with this wind and snow. Wonder how the coffee crop's going to be affected by that, or anything that's still out in the fields that's going to be harvested or needing to be harvested. How this excess moisture and wind damage will affect what's still standing on the heads out in the fields. Let's take a look at the progression. This is the 2-meter anomaly, just a couple feet above ground surface. But here's what you're really looking at is the 850 millibar temperature anomaly. Really shows you where the storm center was on Saturday and Sunday and how it's going to progress all the way over to Brazil during Monday and Tuesday, dropping even cooler temperatures. And with Australia being 40% down in its grain production from last year, I'm really interested to see what comes out of Argentina, Brazil down there for their final numbers, because that'll definitely have an impact on global prices. I mean, these are stunning images coming out of Chile right now. In the icy streets of Santiago. So it came down as this transformation between snow and sleet and ice, and then back to sleet and snow, and then just an ice storm that covered everything. But it's intensifying as it moves toward Brazil, and it sucks a lot of cold air as it crosses over the mountain chain. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. I would predict a lot of tornadoes down in Brazil, and I would also say look out for these absolute ferocious drops in temperatures. And the farmers out there, I'm curious what your reports might be after all this is over with, on what kind of impacts there were wind damage-wise out to what was still standing in the fields. That's one thing we need to think about, too, in the Grand Solar Minimum. These storms are going to come in at different times of the year, and those crops might not be fully ripened or fully grown to maturation to harvest for seed, or, our seeds, what we make flour out of, or whatever it might be, corn. Those things are going to get knocked over in these heavy windstorms, so I'm really curious. Since there is a lot of grain production down there, and they were still harvesting last month, what's still out in the fields, and what's the damage going to be? And I'll leave you on the note here. I didn't even write this. One more, because I find the snow in Santiago so strange. Thanks, Luke. I'll agree. Thanks for watching. Hope you got something out of the video. You should do your own look into temperatures globally and see what you come up with. Use a PDF search engine.